Zach LaVine has become the player that is the center of the universe when it comes to trade rumors, and with the Chicago Bulls continually looking like an unserious team, and with the recent reports that Zach LaVine and the Bulls are working out trade scenarios, I think it's time to talk about which teams should not trade for Zach LaVine. I've seen a lot of articles and videos, obviously, on teams that should trade for Zach LaVine, but not enough about teams that shouldn't trade for Zach LaVine, and I'm going to list 3 teams that I've seen linked to Zach LaVine. Going to the recent Jake Fisher report on Yahoo Sports, Zach LaVine listed a bunch of teams basically, or not him himself, but there is basically a preferred list of teams that Zach LaVine would like to go to, and it's very clear that the Bulls are trying to move Zach LaVine in order to retool, not rebuild, which is just as unserious as a team could get. They should absolutely blow it up, but they're still losing organically, so at least they are going to get a high draft pick this year. But with Zach LaVine being the main target, a guy that could score off the ball and on the ball, one of the best shooters in the NBA the last few seasons, he is in this weird space of that is a skill set that is very attractive if you're a contender trying to add and bolster your roster, but also that contract, which goes through the 2026-27 season with a player option. He is in this weird position of that skill set is very good, but that contract is scary. And if you couple that with the fact that he is a very bad defensive player, for all of his improvements on ball, he's still negative on that end of the floor, and his off-ball defense has always just been flat out bad. So it is a weird trifecta of good offensive player, dynamic offensive player will absolutely add a lot to your team, but do you want to tie yourself down for $40 million a year for the next 3 seasons with Zach LaVine? It gets a little dicey, but there are some teams I think should trade for Zach LaVine, but some of the teams I've seen listed I think are just not good choices for Zach LaVine, or teams that should not pursue Zach LaVine. So let me list 3 teams real quick. Number 1, actually, this might come as a surprise to some people, but considering that Yahoo report listed this team, I had to talk about it immediately, but the San Antonio Spurs should not trade for Zach LaVine. I think the Spurs should continue to build this thing out organically with their young core, led by Victor Wembanyama, led by Devin Vassell. I'm going to make a separate video on this particular player later, but Jeremy Sohan as well. There's a lot of talk about should they continue the point guard experiment. I think they should, as unpopular as that opinion is. I just think the Spurs should let this grow organically, and although Devin Vassell is a good defender, I just don't like that pairing in the backcourt, because I would rather grow Devin Vassell offensively and continue to have him form that 2-man game with Wemby. I would rather have Jeremy Sohan continue to get reps at point guard, because the Spurs really aren't winning anything this year, and I think any reps for Jeremy Sohan, who I really like and who I see as moldable clay, should continue to get reps, even if that pays dividends down the road and people can't exactly see it now. Also, Zach LaVine just, to me, does not fit the timeline for the Spurs team. I don't like the fit just timeline-wise. As much as Zach LaVine provides a dynamic, offensive, explosive skill set to the Spurs, I just think I would rather give the reps and divvy the reps up elsewhere. They could easily take on this contract. They have a lot of cap space and obviously very small rookie contracts. Devin Vassell's extension is one of the better bargains in the NBA, but I would rather just ride it out with this core for the Spurs. Also, the Spurs have a lot of draft picks, and if the Thunder model is any indication, I would just stick with that model and continue to build with this core and not give up any of my draft assets. If the right star comes along with the right contract, the right age for the timeline, yes, spend your draft capital, but I don't think you should spend your draft capital on Zach LaVine either. Another team that I have seen thrown around is the Warriors, and I just don't think the Warriors should do this at all, especially a backcourt of Steph Curry and Zach LaVine. And I know what people are going to say, Klay Thompson looks washed right now, but Klay Thompson is still 6'6", and that Warrior system revolves around those two and Draymond's split action game and all that. I just would not want to add Zach LaVine to this. Also, again, that contract, that's going to hinder the finances for the Warriors long term, and you're just going to have to cover up a lot of things defensively with a backcourt of Zach LaVine and Steph Curry. And by the way, I've always thought Steph Curry was underrated in terms of defense. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that he's a lockdown stopper, but Steph Curry is a better defender than he gets credit for. But pairing him with Zach LaVine, that's just too small of a backcourt. As much fun as it would be offensively in the theoretical offensive punch, I just don't like this fit long-term with this core and the finances of it. Steph Curry's contract would be up in the after the 25-26 season, and Zach LaVine has that player option in 26-27, which he would assuredly take. So I just don't like this fit long-term for the Warriors. Depending on how long Stephen Curry plays, I understand wanting to get as much talent around him as possible, because when you have Steph Curry on your roster, you want to keep winning championships. But Zach LaVine just isn't the guy. I don't like the fit on the team long-term or financially. And then last but not least, this is a team that has been linked to Zach LaVine a lot, is the Philadelphia 76ers. And I've gone back and forth on this because I see the lineups where it's just Joel Embiid and a bunch of bench players, and they sorely need an extra ball handler and shot creator. And Zach LaVine certainly fits that profile. I'm just not a fan of a Tyrese Maxey, Zach LaVine backcourt. I just think that is a recipe to get torched defensively in the playoffs. I would rather just give all the on-ball reps still to Tyrese Maxey. To me, the ideal third option anyway for the Sixers, if they were to, get quote-unquote a third star, which I don't even know if that's the right route to take anymore, would be somebody that's more in the 6'5" to 6'7" range, a wing player that can play both ends of the floor, and Zach LaVine just does not fit that profile. And look, I've gone back, I like Zach LaVine. I think Zach LaVine is a very underrated offensive player, but also with that contract, I just would not want to deal with that long term, especially when the plan is to, use the cap space this summer, or use the cap space to trade for, something that fits and before the trade deadline. So I would rather just wait on that. I don't think Zach LaVine is a good option for the Sixers. I just think that's too much to cover up defensively, and I would rather use the trade assets that Daryl Morey got to get, an extra ball handler and a wing, something like a Tyus Jones, Gordon Hayward. I wouldn't even necessarily go for OG Anunoby, but that's too far down the rabbit hole. I'm just strictly talking about Zach LaVine now. If you're just talking about, options that the Sixers should trade for, I just don't think Zach LaVine is one of them. I would rather just avoid that. Let Tyrese Maxey get his reps, continue to put size, athleticism, and a backup ball handler around Embiid and Maxey, and just let this team rock for this season, then see where the cap space stuff leads you in the summer.